I'm going to take about now 10 minutes to frame the day with my presentation, which is already up there. Okay, start the clock. Make sure I'm on time. Okay, so there are my disclosures, and this is what I want to start with.
Learning is like the brain weaving skills into ropes. Each skill rope is made of many different smaller strands. A strong skill rope not only needs strong strands, but it also needs these strands to be woven tightly together. Each strand needs all the others, and no single strand can do all the work of the larger rope. When it comes to skills, you can't do one without the other. Learners need chances to develop all of their strands. They need to learn how to weave and reweave their skill ropes. And they need opportunities to practice using the resulting ropes. By weaving strong skill ropes, we can produce and maintain strong societies.
So that emphasized a really, really important point that's grounded in what we understand about how the developing brain uses experience to continue and foster its own healthy development, as well as how the brain is organized and how these circuits work. So I show you up here, this is your neuroanatomy lesson for the day, and you can wow your friends at cocktail parties as well. We've got structures such as the amygdala, which are involved in regulating emotion. They're involved in self-regulation, and the hippocampus, which is involved in learning and memory, but also involved in stress responsiveness and other parts of the brain, such as the frontal lobe. And this is the emotional regulation circuit. And this is the learning and memory circuit. Did anybody see the changes that occurred? Did you notice? The only thing that changed was the label, because it's the same circuits that are involved in social, emotional, and cognitive development. So when we say inextricably intertwined, these are all skills that have to be learned. Social, emotional skill sets are learned just as cognitive skill sets, and they occur in concert with each other from very early on in development. You're going to hear about that. So when does circuit assembly start? Now, I've given a lot of talks and spoken to a lot of different audiences, and there's this concept that development starts when you can see the infant at birth. But we know, in fact, that the wiring of the brain to get the infant ready to interact with this world through its sensory systems, what it hears, what it's going to smell, what it's going to see, what it's going to feel, that wiring begins during fetal development. In fact, we already know that for certain senses, they're actually operating during fetal development as well. So here's another anatomy lesson. I don't have a pointer, but if you look in the top left, you see 18W. That's about mid-gestation in the human. You can see those dark structures. Those are the parts of the brain that are going to be relaying sensory information up to our higher centers to be able to interpret them. So already at mid-gestation, we can start to see things getting wired up. And by 32 weeks, you can see on the lower right, there's already quite a bit of neural connections that are forming. It's about this time that the fetus is starting to make about 700 nerve connections a second. So snap your fingers. This is your exercise for the day, except during the coffee breaks and lunch. Right? 700 a second, starting about the third trimester and going on into the second year of life. But at birth, the infant is already wired up in terms of its sensory systems, begin to use them to understand what's going on in this new world. Now, not everything develops in synchrony. This is really important. You can see that the senses, you can see the peaks and the troughs. The peaks represent the peak time of when connections are being made. And for senses, it's before birth and in infancy. And for language, it starts a little bit later in infancy and moves to the first few years of life. And then higher cognitive functions as we live in a more and more complex world, continue to develop, for example, executive functions that you're going to be hearing about, our mental flexibility, our response in inhibitory skill sets that we have, our problem-solving skill sets. They continue to develop into our early 20s and 30s, so there may be 2 or 3 of you in the audience that still have hope. Okay. All right. So, when do most U.S. So, if you look at these curves, this is the neuroscience of the development of these circuits. You can see that language has this somewhat delayed peak, and then peters out in terms of the optimal time in which we're recording. And you're going to hear from experts in the field today about language and the role of experiences in developing language. But in the United States, if we use neuroscience research findings, we wouldn't do what we do now, which is to start teaching second languages at a time when the wiring is not prepared to be able to learn much better. So if any of you have done Rosetta Stone, how's it going? Going well? No, it's not going well. Okay. All right. So experiences are driving the development of these components, social, emotional, and cognitive development. And what the brain does is use these experiences to fire neural cells together, and those that fire together wire together, and those that are not used, those parts of the circuits that are not used very much, are basically going to be eliminated over time, like thatching your garden when it overgrows. So what are the kinds of things, positive or negative experiences, that can be very powerful, starting in prenatal development and on through childhood? So healthy diet, malnutrition as a negative impact, the microbiome, which we're not going to talk about much today, but it has received a lot of press for the right reasons, because it turns out that our gut and our brain talk to each other all the time, and my grandmother knew that. She didn't know why, but she knew that. Serve and return relationships that are important in social and emotional development. Emotional support, as well as toxic stress, which you'll hear about today over and over again from the scientists, and oxidative stress and immune disruptions. These actually change the DNA that we inherit from mom or dad in a process that we call epigenetics. There's a chemical signature that's put on our DNA, and it changes how our genes are used, not just to build the initial scaffold of our brain, but also to continue the process of learning new skill sets. So this is a really powerful process that experiences can change how our DNA is used. The other thing that experiences do is they directly impact the development of these circuits by changing the activity of these circuits. So positive experiences are going to change that activity and stabilize the connections that we want in terms of being able to develop really positive skills. Negative experiences are powerful as well, are going to wire the brain and these circuits that I talked about, social, emotional, and cognitive circuits, in different ways. That's going to cause problems later on for that child. And in fact, there's conversation that goes on between the changing DNA that we have from these experiences, the epigenetics, and how our brain eventually wires up. Oh, what changes with these early influences? And I want to talk about the concept before I finish. I'm almost done. This concept of homeostasis and allostasis. We all kind of know what homeostasis is. It's this range in which we normally operate. Our blood pressure, it doesn't stay stable at one measure. It can go up and go down, but it's within this normal range. And that's sort of diagrammed here. Our blood glucose levels, our emotional regulatory status. We sometimes go up, sometimes go down, but we stay within this range. Well, during development, that range can be impacted by early powerful experiences. It's what we call allostasis, where there can be a shift in where we're operating. And if those experiences are powerful and negative, there's a concept that Bruce McEwen called allostatic load, where actually our homeostatic set point gets changed. There's all sorts of research now that we now recognize that these are changes that are occurring because the nervous system and other parts of the child are trying to develop and adapt to these stressors that are occurring, a toxic stress. And it is going to change over time and into adulthood where that individual is going to operate. So, for example, risk for high blood pressure and risk for inability to emotionally control oneself. So this is what we end up with a new homeostatic set point, which is atypical, not normal. And that's through these powerful experiences that occur. So, in 14 seconds, I have the following. Think about these questions during the course of the day. Write them down quickly. Let's go. I don't see any pens raised. What are the pre- and postnatal stressors that can impact normal brain development related to skill building for promoting healthy self-regulation in each child? What are the different types of the early ingredients from prenatal development through infancy and into toddlerhood that build relationships that are so critical for a child developing healthy self-regulation? And how can each of you use information from the research on neural development, on behavior, and on whole child health to enrich the building of self-regulation skills? Now, that's what you're going to hear about today from fantastic scientists who will have more time than I have in order to make these very important points. Oh, one more question. How do we meet all these fundamental challenges in the context of normal differences in behavior and learning styles that each child expresses? And sort of bringing this idea of precision. You've heard of precision medicine, precision concepts, and understanding that there's not one size fits all. That's really important, and that we think differently, feel differently, and behave differently, and that really needs to be emphasized as well over the course of the day. So I have one more thing. This is a surprise. So you saw the video on skill ropes, right? Okay, so here's a skill rope. And we'll see what happens. So if I pull this apart, it'd be pretty weak, right? You may or may not remember this concept just based on the 45-second video that you saw. But if you think about a famous neuroscientist skipping rope, skill rope. All right, that's my dancing for the day, Vicki.